back to the Fragrance Report, where we explore the story of fragrance throughout history, whether talking about ingredients, trends, or even scandals surrounding fragrance throughout the ages. I'm your host, Anya, and today's episode will be quite an interesting one because we're going to be talking about ancient Rome. We're going to be talking about the emperors that loved fragrance. We're going to be talking about how fragrance was both an olfactory pleasure and even suffocated someone. And we're even going to be delving into the various ways that Rome was actually a trailblazer when it came to perfume and the development of it. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, hello, my name is Anya. I love fragrance. I talk about it here every single weekday, Monday through Friday on YouTube, but I also publish this podcast called The Fragrance Report. It's available every single Wednesday on YouTube and Spotify, and it's meant to shine a light on fragrance history. I'm a history nerd, I love history, and I love talking about it on this podcast, so if you're interested, definitely do consider following. First, we're going to kickstart this episode with the perfume favorites, the fragrances I've been wearing the most over this past week. I'm not going to lie, the weather here in Washington, D.C. has been absolutely terrible. It's just been rainy, humid, and just overall unpleasant. So the fragrances I've been leaning towards kind of like are sort of summer, but also not really because it's so like icky outside. So with that being said, my hair has been going through the ringer, and whenever I want my hair to just look and smell fresher, I often will use a perfume specifically on my hair. And one of my favorites for this purpose is by Aroma Concepts. This is a really interesting fragrance because to me it just smells like soap. It smells like a white cake of luxury soap, the kind that you'd find in like a nice hotel. And it's interesting because it has a variety of notes, which I'm going to list out right now, that don't necessarily spell soapiness. It's interesting like how the fragrance actually has a different smell than what's actually listed in terms of what my interpretation is. But this has top notes of orange, blackcurrant, grapes, and wild berries, a mid of grapefruit, rose petals, red wine, grape leaves, and divana, and then a base of vetiver, amberwood, and plum. It's interesting looking at all those notes because I definitely can kind of see like there might be some grape notes in here. I can see where the vetiver comes from. The grapefruit is definitely apparent. But overall, this is a very soapy fragrance to my nose, which is why I like it so much. I've also been kicking it back old school and going for Coco Mademoiselle. This was in part inspired by Debbie Rawling because she recently did a video talking about, I think it was like her perfume favorites or old school fragrances that she really loves, something along the lines of that. But I actually do own Coco Mademoiselle, and she did mention that, and I decided to go ahead and wear it. And I've been wearing it a few times this week. So this perfume is super old school. It was launched in 2001, but this fragrance has top notes of orange, mandarin orange, and bergamot, as well as orange blossom, a mid of Turkish rose, jasmine, mimosa, and ylang ylang, and then a base of patchouli, white musk, vetiver, vanilla, tonka bean, and opanax. This fragrance is like the ideal fruity patchouli floral fragrance. It lasts all day. It's just so beautiful, elegant, crisp. And as you can tell, I've been loving my citruses lately. So one of the newest fragrances in my collection is actually this gorgeous vanilla from Sora Dora. This is called Orchidee Rouge, and I received this fragrance in PR, but I wasn't expecting to fall in love with it as much as I am, specifically because I kind of was gonna, like, I thought it was gonna be like another just vanilla, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes when I already have a lot of fragrances, it takes a lot for me to be wow, or to think like, wow, this is an amazing fragrance when it comes to vanilla fragrances. But this one was quite compelling. It has notes of vanilla absolute, caramel, almond milk, rum, heliotrope, elemi, Sicilian bergamot, Ceylon cinnamon, benzoin, white musk, orange, and ylang ylang. This smells like a cushiony, beautiful, slightly boozy vanilla fragrance, but it kind of reminds me of like a velvet fabric because it's interesting because it's sweet, but it's not gourmand sweet. It's kind of like a clean, sweet vanilla, but not overtly so. It's very intriguing. This smells like this like lovely kind of thick, heavy fabric. It's really beautiful. I've been wearing this a lot. It's just one of those really comforting fragrances, those everyday appropriate, safe fragrances that you can just spray on and not have to worry about too much. And then of course I've also been really loving Mallow by Sora Dora as well. It's been a Sora Dora kind of week. This is a gorgeous cushiony violet marshmallow fragrance. There's heliotrope in here as well, raspberry, vanilla. This fragrance is a fragrance that adheres to like the violet and orange blossom trend, like the violet marshmallow. Let me look at the notes. So this fragrance has top notes of raspberry, vanilla sugar, and pink pepper, a mid of heliotrope, orange blossom, and almond, and then a base of violet, black musk, and amber. This perfume smells so full-bodied, so beautiful. You can smell the high-quality nature of this fragrance. It's really beautiful. I love it so much, and it lasts all day on me. So this is an absolute essential and the perfect like in-between fragrance for when you want to feel like as if you're in the summer weather, but the weather has been terrible. So that's what I've needed this week. The Romans were definitely not the first people to use fragrance. They actually inherited it from the Egyptians, from the Greeks, and the Persians, but they were the people that gave perfume its name. The term perfume literally means through smoke, and this is the Latin translation of it, and it's the name that the Romans associated with fragrance. The Romans might have even used fragrance more extravagantly than their predecessors. In the earlier days, perfume was not necessarily worn as it is today in the traditional sense. It was burned, which is why we have that term through smoke, perfume. And fragrance actually started off as being a sacred offering in places of worship. Frankincense and myrrh were placed on altars as offerings to higher powers, and the spiritual use of perfume is what gave the fragrance itself this elevated status. And it was not just holy, it was something powerful that was used in daily life. And if we remember, Rome did not start as the great empire that we know of today. It actually developed over many, many years. So perfume developed with it, and by the 1st century AD, perfume had become central to Roman life. The numbers are quite staggering. Historical records suggest the Roman Empire consumed 2,800 tons of frankincense and 550 tons of myrrh every year. This is consumer culture in the ancient world. This isn't just a spiritual devotion to fragrance. This is how we know that they had a great love for perfume that went beyond the spiritual necessity for it. As many of us already know, public baths were central to Roman culture. More than just places to wash, they were great places for people to socialize, spend the day, participate in grooming rituals, and have an olfactory experience. Wealthy Romans spent hours or even the entire day there scrubbing, oiling, exfoliating, and perfuming. And the typical bathing routine was as follows. So a strigil was used to scrape the skin clean, and I'm going to put the spelling on the screen. I might be mispronouncing a lot of these. Then they had a massage with fragrant oils, often infused with exotic resins, herbs, and flowers. Then they finally had a misting of perfume from head to toe, not just for the body, but for the hair, the beard, even the soles of the feet. Fragrance had become an extension of status. The rarer the fragrance ingredient was, the more luxurious was the effect. And perfume wasn't just used for personal use. As we talked about, it was burned, but it was also used to scent the home. The walls, curtains, floors, all could be misted with something called aqua mirabilis, a fragrant water, sometimes infused with saffron or rose. Now, the Roman obsession when it came to fragrance goes a step further when we talk about Emperor Nero. If perfume was a performance, Nero was the master director. He was a patron of the arts. He was a lover of excess, and some would say he was even a megalomaniac with a touch for spectacle. He was obsessed with roses, which was known as the flower of Venus, the Roman goddess of love. And he even had silver piping installed in the palace ceilings that misted guests with rose water during banquets. One infamous dinner party featured a mechanized ceiling that dropped rose petals onto guests. According to the historian Suetonius, one man was smothered to death under the sheer weight of the flowers. It was less a dinner party than an olfactory opera, and Nero was definitely the extravagant conductor. Even military commanders were known to scent their armor with perfume and carry vials of perfumes with themselves for good luck. Perfume was a symbol of not just luck, it was not just something that was used in religious ceremonies by this point, it was a way to adorn oneself and to really step into one's femininity or masculinity. Now, this boom in perfumery led to another Roman innovation, glass blowing. Before this, perfumes were kept in alabaster or clay vessels, but with the invention of glass blowing around 50 BCE, artisans began crafting delicate, translucent perfume containers, some shaped like birds, fruits, or mythological figures. These perfume containers were not just containers, they were known as status symbols to showcase one's wealth. But not everyone agreed with this use for perfume. Q. Pliny the Elder, who was a naturalist, writer, and scathing social critic. In the epic Natural History, Pliny lamented, "Perfumes serve the purpose of the most superfluous of all forms of luxury. They die in the very hour when they are used." Yet, in the same passage, he also gives perfume its most poetic praise. Their highest recommendation is that when a woman passes by, her scent may attract the attraction even of persons occupied in something else. In other words, he believed that even though perfume may be fleeting, it haunts, it lingers, it has an impact. As we all know, Rome eventually did fall, and perfume did alongside it. Therefore, the fall wasn't just political, it was economic, and it was olfactory. With economic instability, the trade routes were disrupted. The costly ingredients that were required to create Roman perfumery, specifically spices from India, resins from Arabia, rare flowers, began to get harder to access, and perfume faded from daily life and retreated into just religious contexts. Incense remained and was used in churches to symbolize prayers rising to heaven, but personal fragrance diminished greatly. As the Middle Ages commenced, perfume became less of an accessory and more a tool that people could use for medicinal purposes or even to cleanse one's spirit. Cloistered monks grew herbs like lavender, rosemary, and sage more for purification purposes rather than pleasure. City life during the Middle Ages, bad bathing habits, and the constant threat of plague meant that scent was also used to purify the air around these people. And back then, they would even create these small balls filled with herbs and resins hung from belts or carried in pockets to ward off bad air. So why revisit all of this? Why does Emperor Nero's obsession with roses or Pliny's complaint about scented women still matter? Well, I think it's really interesting looking back at these ancient times and recognizing that even back then, people really did see fragrance as an accessory, and people did partake in its use in different ways depending on the world around them. So like as Rome prospered, so did the use of perfume, but as it fell, the use of perfume was also affected in that way. I do find it quite interesting hearing that quote about turning heads with your perfumes, and that's something that's so relatable today, and something that I like about history is that when you look back at these stories and when you see how these people behaved, how they ran their daily lives, it's something that's so innately relatable to the way we operate today. And sometimes it can be difficult to relate to the way that people in the ancient world lived their life, but really at the end of the day, we're all human and we all have similar likes and dislikes. We all use our senses in similar ways. We enjoy nice smells, and that's why I think what's nice about the perfume is that it's timeless. The way we use it, the scents that we might create with fragrance notes or accords might change slightly with the times, but at the end of the day, it's something that will never quite go out of style. So let me know, did you learn anything interesting during this episode of the Fragrance Report? Which historical fact stood out the most to you? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye. This episode's music was brought to you by Kevin McLeod over at Incompetech. This is Beauty Flow by Kevin McLeod at incompetech.com and is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license.